chapter we have here for AIAA. And I'm going to serve as the moderator for this event. So I'm going to be kind of just facilitating questions between myself and our panel members. I've got some topics here that I want to discuss. And there's going to be a lot of time in between topics and then at the end for questions that you might have in addition to what I might have here. The purpose of this event, it's to provide really a diverse outlook on a lot of these questions and answers. So, the panel that we brought today is very diverse in many ways. And sometimes they might agree on things and sometimes they might have different opinions or different experiences. So it's definitely going to be interesting to, get a feel for all of the differences when it comes to that. I want to say thank you to the panel members for taking the time in your schedules and for doing this for us. I know that this is a very beneficial event, so I'm looking forward to it. Before we go on with the questions, I want to briefly introduce each panel member, kind of give you a little bit about their background, and so you can get a firm understanding of why they're so diverse and where they differ in their expertise and their experiences. So I want to start off with Dr. Raghavan. Dr. Raghavan got her bachelor's degree in mechanical engineering at, excuse my pronunciation, it's Nanyang?
Yes.
The Technological University. And she actually went and got her master's of science in aeronautical engineering in structures in France at Sub-Aero. Did I pronounce that too?
Sub-Aero.
Sorry. Excuse me. So after Dr. Raghavan's education, she worked for 7 years in the aerospace industry as a senior engineer at Singapore Technologies Aerospace. She was involved in aircraft structural analysis of the F-5 airplane and aircraft maintenance, repair, modifications, and kind of focus on development of fatigue crack inspection using ultrasonic and eddy current techniques. She is currently a faculty member at UCF. She teaches structure class, and she's also AIAA UCF's faculty advisor. So thank you, Dr. Raghavan. Next, I want to mention Dr. Glenn Gebert. He is a senior technical fellow at Lockheed Martin. He is the head of aerodynamics over at Lockheed Martin and is responsible for all of the analysis and the eventual design of all of the rocket or the missiles that come out of Lockheed Martin. Dr. Glenn Gebert got his bachelor's degree in mathematics from Carroll University, correct?
Carroll College.
Carroll College, excuse me. And then he went on to Notre Dame, where he spent the rest of his academic career pursuing his master's degree in mechanical engineering and a PhD in aerospace engineering. So throughout Dr. Glenn Gebert's career, he's published over 35 technical papers. He's also an adjunct professor at UF, but mainly here now teaching some grad courses, and is lead aerodynamicist at Lockheed Martin. So thank you, Dr. Gebert. Next, I want to introduce Mr. Aaron Blevins. Mr. Aaron Blevins is a Florida licensed professional mechanical engineer, but very interestingly, also a UCF alumni. So graduated from UCF with an aerospace degree. And he went on to work for a company called Metters Incorporated, where he was responsible for mechanical and electrical wiring design for simulation and training purposes. He pursued a master's of business administration in general management and marketing from Rollins College over in Winter Park, very close to us, while working for Metters and managing programs regarding simulation and training, totaling over $4.5 million in value. Mr. Blevins has over 10 years of experience in the simulation and training industry and has worked on projects of all size scopes. Other experience includes, project management, systems engineering, design engineering, embedded engineering, programming, and manufacturing documentation and planning. He said that his goal was to continue working hard to solve the problems and find solutions to advance the warfighter to keep our nation safe. And Aaron is currently serving as the vice chair for the Central Florida section chapter of AIAA. Chair now?
Sure.
Oh, excuse me. That's
probably from the old resume.
Yikes! I'm so sorry about that.
Yeah,
Well, congratulations. Thank you, Mr. Rhodes. So I know I'm kind of going across the table here, but Mr. Michael Johansson, he's a research engineer. He works at NASA over at SwampWorks. He is particularly in SwampWorks Innovative Development Lab at Kennedy Space Center. Mr. Johansson is also an alumni of UCF. He graduated here and got his Bachelor's of Science in Aerospace Engineering, and just recently also got his Master's degree. So congratulations. He is currently pursuing, or no, he's not currently pursuing, he already got that. So he joined NASA in 2009, and he's worked on a lot of technology that involves Mars missions and development of projects. He led the design, manufacturing, and testing of a prospecting sensor system currently under consideration for a future Mars mission. He also designed an electrostatic elimination tool to remove charge buildup on Mars spacecraft. He's currently developing a variety of dust mitigation technologies for future Mars exploration missions in the 20s and the 30s, and is working on technology demonstration payload intended to fly to the International Space Station in 2019, so very soon. Very, very cool too. Michael is a STEM communication advocate and a member of NASA's Speakers Bureau. Since joining NASA, he provided education and outreach services to thousands of students around the U.S. and has been the subject of a number of national television interviews. And in the summer, this last summer in 2017, he represented NASA in the United States at the International Space University in Cork, Ireland. So thank you for being here, Mr. And last but not least, we have Mr. Nick Kindred. He's operations manager over at Jacobs Technology. He was raised in Southern Indiana, where he actually attended and graduated from Purdue University, got his Bachelor's of Science in Aviation Technology, and started his career at NASA as a NASA contractor technician working on systems in the Space Shuttle's aft section. After the Challenger accident, he moved into system engineering. In that role, he performed testing, servicing, launch, and landing operations on the Space Shuttle's reaction control, orbiting maneuvering, and main propulsion systems. After years spent in systems engineering, he transitioned into project management, leading Space Shuttle modifications and projects related to the NASA Constellation program. A couple of those projects included outfitting the shuttles with their new glass cockpit mods and leading efforts associated with the successful launch of the Arias X spacecraft. At the completion of this shuttle program, his career path led him to become involved with the current NASA Deep Space Orion SLS Man program, whose goal is to return man back to the moon and eventually to Mars too. In his role as a spacecraft integration engineer, he assisted NASA development ground processing concepts and developed ground and flight system designs for the Orion spacecraft. In his current assignment, I've got a couple things wrong here, so please correct me if I get anything wrong here. In his current assignment, he is an operations manager for NASA Operations Contractor. His duties include planning and managing operations associated with preparing the mobile launcher for assembly and launching of the SLS rocket. His career in NASA's manned spaceflight program has spanned 32 years and participated in 120 NASA missions. He's been recognized for contributions to the space program by being awarded the very prestigious award of the NASA Astronauts Silver Snoopy Award. And I believe you actually have to be presented that award by an astronaut himself, so very cool. And the NASA's Superior Public Leadership Medal of Honor. That's very cool. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Kudrow. So before we get into the topics, all of the topics and questions that I have here prescribed for this event kind of boil down to four main four main topics. So generally, we're going to focus on finding a workplace mentor, expectations for your first year, your fifth year, what's going on in your 10th year. These are all questions that I'm sure many of us have. I know I do. And then also kind of the difference between career paths that you could choose. So between, do you want to go into management? Do you want to do research? Or do you want to, be in academia? It's really, up to you to make that decision and kind of analyze where you want to go and what you want to do and what you're going to be doing. Because a lot of times we don't know what we're doing, so it's really good to get the experience from very successful members as sitting on this panel here. So for the first topic, we're going to talk about getting experience and finding that first job offer. So these questions that I have here, anyone can feel free to answer them. We tried to get more mics. I apologize about that. If it's not so much of a hassle. I believe the room's pretty small, so it might not have to move the mic very much if it's inconvenient. So anyone that wants to take a shot at the first one, please do so. So, what do you find impressive on a student resume, and what stands out to companies?
I can take a stab at this one.
Sure.
So, when I'm looking at a resume, really what I like to see is opportunities where it shows a situation of a student or professional engineer where they've taken an initiative. One of the questions that I always ask during an interview, I always ask them, tell me about a problem that you had and tell me what you do to solve it. Because that tells me exactly what type of employee they're going to be, how they're going to approach a situation, and if this is someone that I can hand a project and they go off and they run it, or is this something I'm going to have to coach them and tell them to go each step along the way. The things I look for if they come back and they say, I get this problem, and then the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and go seek out, one of my partners or coworkers and say, hey, this is what I'm doing. And so, that tells me that they're team oriented. And so that's one of the things that I like to see on a resume is an obstacle that they've overcome and kind of how they approach it.
So I would say it depends on who your interviewer is. I have a coworker who will hardly consider a person that doesn't have below, or that has below a 3.8 GPA. I have other coworkers where GPA doesn't play as critical of a role, and it's more about the experience of the individual. What have they done in their extracurriculars or projects within their courses? How do they articulate themselves during an interview? For me, being a member of NASA's Speakers Bureau and being someone that's in research, communication is very important to me. So your resume is a ticket to an interview, but after that, it's more about, I've determined that you have the technical merit for an entry-level position. What I'm concerned more with now is how do you hold yourself? What's your personality like? How will you fit within the group? But on a resume, to get to a point where I'm going to give you an interview, it's from an internship perspective, I would look for somebody that's done most of their baseline courses, have done their calculus and entry-level physics courses, and those sort of things. Got those out of the way. Mostly NASA hires from student programs, so my answer will be mostly from a student programs perspective. So I look first at that, I look at your GPA, but then I'm also looking at your letters of recommendation. If you've had previous NASA experience, did that NASA person write you a letter of recommendation? And if not, why? So if you have a lot of experience, but you don't have a lot of letters of recommendation, that would be something that I'm interested to learn a little more about. I think for me, being in a research field, a more well-rounded resume is important to me. because we do a lot of diverse work in our group, I may not look for someone who is an expert in something, but has had a variety of experiences. But I think you'll hear from all of us that it just depends on the person that's conducting the interview. What is it that they are looking for?
So I'll add a little bit to what Aaron and Michael said. Is similar to what they said, and a lot of times it is like you just look at a GPA and maybe the school that they went to and things like that. But then also stuff that I'll look at is like what student projects they participated in. I was talking to people earlier about the AIAA Design Build Fly, and so that's sort of something that I might look at on the interview and be, or rather on the resume, and be impressed with. And then when I have the interview, I'll discuss it with him. And of course, there's different levels of participating in student projects. There's some people that show up and they're asked to do something and they do it, but then there's other people that really take hold of that part of the project. And generally you can't get that from the resume, but you do get it from the interview, to what level people participated. And of course, I think almost every job is really looking for the people that didn't just phone it in, but really did good work on it. And then other times it's sometimes will show up on a resume, but then come out more in the interview is sort of your self-learning projects. There was a gentleman one time I was talking to, and he had a little blip on there that he designed a door to let his cat in the house. And I asked about that, and he went on and talked about this elaborate system that was based upon the weight of the cat, but also it had to be in a certain spot, and it would manually open this door and close it down, and then sometimes it would open, I think, the kitty litter box, and sometimes not. And that was pretty cool. I was pretty impressed that and on his own, he just did this sort of stuff. And I definitely got the impression, and maybe even was told, that this was just one project of things that he worked on all the time. So that definitely impressed me. And then I guess the last thing, that's something that I look at a resume, and I think a few others do, but a lot of people don't, is programming experience. A lot of schools these days do not teach programming, and instead they teach MATLAB, which is programming-like, but it's not a real language. And certainly the people that work for me need to have skills at least in Fortran, if not C++.
Okay, I'll add a little bit to that as well. I think it's being able to stand out. So a lot of people have the courses they need, the GPA, if it's reasonable. And again, it's like everyone said, it depends on who's looking at it. But I think also showing that you're kind of goal-oriented. That is, that you talk about an experience, or you list an experience, but there's something that it amounted to. So if you did an internship, that you have some outcomes from it, that's listed there as well. And that idea of being goal-oriented, I think, is great, because it'll show up not just in your resume, it will show up in your recommendation letters as well. If you did a good job at your internship, for example, it won't just be, I did an internship for this many months. It would be, I did an internship for these many months, from which I produced this report, I did this presentation, or I produced a solution for some problem that they were having at the company. And then you'd see that coming from the letter as well. So it's sort of like you show your experiences in your resume, but you show that you use those experiences and produce something out of it. You've made the most of those experiences in that sense. Yeah, so I think that's kind of what we're looking for. A lot of times people are looking for what stands out, that you're not just doing the standard things that one would do and just taking the classes. That's really important, but then you're doing more than what's standard. You're taking the initiative to do additional things that are out there, use the opportunities that are given to you. And that means that if you're given opportunities in the workplace, you're going to go ahead and take them as well. So you're kind of like a go-getter.
I just had a couple short things. I'm not really a hiring manager, but we hired so many people this last year. And one of the design engineer managers, I went and talked to him. I said, I asked him, I said, Hamad, so what are things that you've been looking at when these guys come in? And he gave me some very specific stuff that I thought was really good. He said, first of all, no typos in your resume. He says that's the biggest turn off. He said if he sees a typo, it just means that you haven't been paying close attention to detail. He says they look at senior projects. He says sometimes guys bring portfolios of work that they've done, even if it's been a project at school or something. So that kind of turns them on, he says. Obviously, you should dress nice. I mean, one thing you could do is research the company a little bit before you come in, you know, and ask intelligent questions when you come in and show that you're interested in the company, you know. And I thought that was pretty insightful too. You know, I mean, these are just basic nuts and bolts kind of things that you do when you go in. And he said, make sure you read the posting before you come in and know what the job is, and ask questions about, you know, that's in that posting. He says that shows that you're interested in the job, you looked at it. And then let's see, what can you bring to the company? You know, you're going to be, you know, like these guys have said, you're going to be competing with all these people that they all got good grades. You know, that everything looks good, but what are you going to actually bring to the company? You know? And then last thing I thought that was really good, he said at the very end, they always ask the same question. So, you know, why do you want the job? You know, and he said you would be surprised at how many people say, you know, I don't know, because I kind of like that. They don't show that. He says he wants to see a strong statement of why you want that job. You know, so make sure that when you leave the interview that you say, I want this job. You know, you make a strong statement for that. And he said you'd be surprised how many people don't do that.
And part of what they talked about in the workshops yesterday kind of stems off of this question. You know, anything in your resume is fair game. The person on the other side is totally subject to ask you any question they want. There were some pretty funky questions that they asked last night, and they were funny, but they happened. So it's, you know, definitely good to do your research and definitely know what you're talking about beforehand. On a side note, the packet of all of the information regarding resumes and interviewing skills was emailed to everyone that RSVP'd. So if you didn't RSVP, just stay after. We'll get you connected with that. But it's a very, very thorough document that provides for a lot of correction to error. So like Mr. Kitt was saying, you know, typos, spacing errors are also another thing. Those little things like that, huge turnoffs. So we're gonna move on to the next question. It kind of stems off of, you know, what's impressive. To you in particular, to each of you, how would you value an undergraduate research position?
I could start with that. I think an undergraduate research position is something that's a little bit more challenging than taking your classes. So it kind of shows that if I see that on a resume that you maybe didn't need to do it unless you were doing an honors thesis, but that kind of just shows that you're out to get something more than what your education is, what you need to get that degree. And another thing about research is that it's likely that you had to work quite independently. So it means that anyone who did undergraduate research is likely to have had to think about problems which don't have an answer in a book, you know, had to go read a lot of literature outside and find information that helps them to understand the problems or the challenges, and they don't have an answer. And then they had to formulate a method to search for the answers, and they mostly had to kind of work relatively independently on those things, and so that shows me that there's some independence as well. I'd also say that with undergraduate research, there's often a chance that you are going to encounter failure. So, and you know that you might have to pick up the pieces and figure out different directions to go after that. So I think a person who has gone through that process is probably able to deal with issues or challenges that don't have a quick answer in front of them. Yeah.
From a NASA perspective, I agree with everything you said there. But to just give you an idea, to play the numbers game, it wouldn't be uncommon for a position that was open for something like 4 days would have something like 2,000 applicants for something like 20 positions. So that's about 1%. So anything that sets you apart from your colleagues, your competition, is going to be a good thing. Undergraduate research gives you the opportunity to experience some things that you definitely will not experience in your coursework. And being from a lab environment, that is something that I am definitely looking for.
I can.
Okay.
I'll add to what they said as far as the research, all the things that were said earlier, the value of it. It also sort of demonstrates the ability to write technical writing. And what I find most unfortunate in finding people to work for me and doing job interviews is I ask no questions and collect really no data to know if a person can write. And I can tell you the difference between having an employee that can write and one that can't is probably for each report a difference of a half hour to maybe 2 days of my time. So if somebody can't write, we still have to put out that report, and it requires me a couple days probably to review it. But if they can write, bing, bing, boom, I'm done after reading it quick. So that's it. But then that said, and I like the idea of undergraduate research, but there's, as far as like resumes and getting hired, I think there is some really good positive parts to it, but I also think if you're doing that instead of maybe some of these student projects and stuff and being really involved in it, there's a trade there, and it's not necessarily worth it to do the research project and not do these other projects to get you noticed.
Whenever I see a research project on paper, it tells me a couple things. You know, it shows that the individual knows how to work from, you know, an initial problem statement all the way through to, depending on the research, you know, potential recommendations and applications. You know, from an industry perspective, you know, you need to be able to communicate and sell your idea that you're interested in implementing in the organization. If you can't do that, you know, you're not going to be very effective in your position. And so I think, you know, research project definitely gives you that background. The other thing is it shows organizational skills and being able to segment a project in multiple steps and be able to execute that project. So
I agree with everything they said. I don't think I could add more.
And for the record, if you ever feel like that with any of these questions, you don't have to answer any of them, although it's, you know, appreciated. We've got plenty of questions. This topic kind of split into two sections. It was getting experience and finding that first job offer. So we covered getting experience, but I want to switch to finding that first job offer. Is there any way in particular that you believe might be better to come across an internship opportunity other than, you know, just going to the website, putting in your resume, applying, and just hoping for the best? Would you recommend anything personally reaching out to the HR manager or anything of that nature?
Well, I can start that, I guess, but, well, first of all, I mean, you know, if you have contacts, you know, if you have a friend or somebody that works in the company or something, I mean, contacts are the best way to get in. But, you know, my last job was got in because it was a surfing buddy. We go surfing, and he told me about the job with me. So using those human contacts and, you know, getting in organizations like this, getting to know people. One of you guys will be a senior, you get out, you know, a couple years behind, you got a buddy that works for Lockheed or something. You know, so those personal, they can get those resumes in front of people, you know, so I think that's absolutely a good way to do it. But all the other outside stuff that you do, you know, just, I think networking is super big.
yeah, I would agree with that. Networking is probably the #1 best way to get a position in an organization. I'll caveat that with saying that if you network through an individual who may not necessarily be a stellar employee, that may not work to your benefit. But you know, if I have a good employee that brings me a resume that says, "Hey, here's a buddy of mine," you know, whether or not I'm looking right then or there, if it's an employee that I have a lot of trust in, and I really respect their work, you know, I'll save that resume of their friend because I know that they're putting their
Reputation.
Thank you. Their reputation on the line as well.
So I think networking is really good, and not only just with the HR manager, but of course if you know an engineer to do it, that would be good. And I don't know how you find them. I guess maybe these sorts of events, or if you go to conferences. And the only other thing I'll add is, as far as internships and stuff go, you start early. For instance, at Lockheed right now, we're collecting resumes for summer internships. So some people think you have to wait until February or March or something, but in reality, it's this time of year that we do that.
Yeah, Jacobs does a lot. They do a lot of interns
about the same time.
And they post theirs on their job site. So if you go to the website in the career section, they actually post the internships on there. So, but you got to watch for them because they kind of come up really quick.
So, quick tip on that. We have our recruiter, Tracy, who does all the interns at Jacobs, was going to come on yesterday, but had some car trouble. But she did tell me they do last about a week. So, they only have so much staff, they can only look at so many resumes. So, once so many get through their filter, they make sure you're an engineering student and stuff, usually 1 to 2 weeks and that's it. So, keep on it. Don't think, I'll apply in March and make up my mind. Get on it early, apply now. You know, if something's open, take that chance, because you may not get it in another week when you decide to polish up your resume.
I guess the other thing, I promised to let you talk. Was this question just about internships or just employment?
I would assume internships, just because it's a little bit more.
Okay, well I better say this before I forget. And it sounds like maybe as other people are saying it, this is the most extraordinary year ever to graduate in aerospace engineering. I have never seen the hiring going on in my 25 plus years in the industry. This has got to be the best year. So if you can't find a job this year, you really suck. But again, apply early and be noticed. But yeah, it's a great year, and it's not just at Lockheed. I hear it all around.
Yeah, I'll grab on what Glenn said about the conferences and expand on that a little bit. I think conferences are a great way to get technical, connections with anyone, because you're going to see people from all kinds of different companies in one area. So, and we're really lucky to be in Orlando. So you should make use of that and actually be at the conferences. I'm kind of surprised every year we have SciTech, which is the AIAA's major conference that happens here in January, and I don't see enough UCF students out there. As student members, you should turn up, and they actually have events at these conferences which are specifically set up for speed networking, where you get to talk to a whole bunch of people. The other thing I would add is everyone mentioned being part of a network like AIAA. So I'm not like the advertising agency for it, but I'd say that when I first joined AIAA, I was a student, and I never stopped being part of that. So it's been more than 20 years since I'm a member of AIAA, and it has worked for me in different ways all throughout my career. It's like, where do you find another job somewhere in the middle of your career? And it's like you said, it's through connections. But where are those connections coming from? It just could be a listserv, an email serve, because you're part of this organization. So being part of at least one professional organization, whatever it is you choose to be part of, and being somewhat active in it. And they have young professionals groups that you could join as a new employee of a company that is focused on creating the events for interns, to hire interns, or to encourage more networks for employment. So yeah, definitely make use of that.
Actually, does it cost money for students to go to the SciTech conference?
Yes, but it's really subsidized, so it's not
much at all.
Not much at all.
See, it'd be crazy not to go, right? I mean, you should probably go, and then you find somebody there that's talking, and afterwards ask them about their paper, because they love that. They love that. And then you just ingratiate yourself to them and just throw your resume.
Not to plug it more, but last night during the workshop, I made mention that if you're a AIAA UCF student, in SciTech, we have a booth for the Central Florida section. And we usually rely on students to help man that booth and tell exhibit attendees what the Central Florida section is, what we do, and also share what the UCF student branch is doing as well. And so with that, you're actually able to get into the exhibit hall. I think we're next to NASA and Boeing this year. You're out there all day long talking with a bunch of board engineers that are hanging out and stuck with you in an exhibit hall. But it's a great networking opportunity, and you get to go out there for free if you're volunteering as an exhibitor for the section. So
yeah, but you're stuck next to Boeing.
I want to mention, a couple of weeks back, I was just checking my email, just doing some homework, and I came across this conference. It was the Aerospace Alliance Summit in New Orleans. And my first assumption was, it's in New Orleans, I can't go to that. And then I was like, well, why can't I go to that? So I looked into it further, and I actually got a couple of people to, get interested in it with me. and we actually went all the way out to New Orleans, and it turned out of the 100 professionals that were there, there was a student registration fee, so they were accepting of students, but we were the only 3 people there, the only 3 students there. So it was really cool because a lot of times it may seem intimidating, but at the end of the day, these professionals are people like all of us, and a lot of times they like to see that young drive in you, and they actually want to talk to you. So I would definitely recommend keeping an eye out for conferences, and it's definitely something to plan your schedule around because they don't happen often, and they are very beneficial. And SciTech is coming up in January, so it's definitely something to save the date. I want to take one question. We're running a little late on this particular topic. Does anyone have any particular question regarding finding that first job or getting experience?
Well,
Yes.
was there somebody else?
Go ahead.
All right, cool. It's not so much a direct question for you guys. It's like, I don't know if you guys would like to quote unquote play this with me, but as Nick said before, he said that one of the most asked questions was having a firm statement as to how much you want the job. My question to you guys is, how did you guys answer that question on your interview? Like, just to get it from your perspective.
How did we answer it?
Yeah, if you guys remember.
I can say this much, that I'm not the great example because I think I failed I don't know how many interviews.
Yeah.
I did it the hard way. I learned about every way not to do it. But,
I can say for me, and it's something that I like to see in candidates, but reaching deep. I mean, you really need to know, what do you want to do what do you want to do with your life? I mean, what is your passion? What is your goal? And I think if you start there, leading into that question, it'll answer itself. Because you will be there for the purpose that's driving your life, and that's
just be honest.
come natural.
I mean, I wouldn't say I'm doing it for the money, but odds are you're not going through all this pain in school just for the money, right? So, I mean, you could do other things to make more money, but why aren't you going through all these classes and stuff to do it? Because you want to do great things. You want to launch people into space, or you want to. I mean, that's the type of things you answer. What drives you?
So I'm actually in the process now of reviewing applications for our spring semester of interns, and this is one of the fields that's in your application. Why do you want to work for NASA, or how do you fit into NASA? What's your reason behind this? And I can't tell you how many applications that I've read that say essentially the same thing, and that's, well, NASA is great. They do a lot of cool things, and so I think I want to do cool things too. And of course it's worded differently, but it's essentially that. That's at least 80% of the applications that I've reviewed. A better way to answer that question is to instead say, why specifically, so this gets into writing a targeted application, specifically how your strengths benefit whatever thing that you're applying for. You have the opportunity there to say, I know that you're working on this specific thing, here's how my experiences relate to that, and I think that I can benefit you in this way. Just in sort of generic terms, but that is so much of a better answer because it shows that you've taken the time to first probably do some research into the application. Actually, I talked to a person recently who not only didn't remember even applying for the position, but had no idea about anything to do with it. So I didn't really know where to go with that sort of application. The person didn't know what they applied to; they just threw out a resume. So I would say make a targeted application. In that question, you will probably be asked that in almost all of your applications that you put in there. Take some time to think about what the interviewer might be looking for. Research into what that company or what that department in a certain agency is looking for, or what they are specifically working on, maybe certain technologies that they're developing, and then try to play that to your advantage. You have experience in LabVIEW, and you know that they're doing some sort of LabVIEW control stuff. There's a perfect opportunity there for you to talk more about yourself instead of this generic statement that many students write.
Okay, thank you. Sure.
So I agree. I mean, basically, you want to talk not about the company, but about yourself to do that. And I had my own personal experience of, well, I applied for the job at the place I did my internship at, and I was an intern in as an analyst, and I was thinking I was going to apply to the job to be an analyst. And then after I put the requisition in, I realized that I was going to be interviewed by the maintenance group. So there I was thinking, well, I was going to be with the analysts, and now I'm now in the maintenance group. So I went to that interview with a little bit of an open mind, and I just had to think about everything that I had done, which would be shows that I actually want to do that kind of maintenance job. I love hands-on work. I've done this when I was, in college. That showed that I liked hands-on work. I like solving problems that are outside of, what's in standard theory, or there are problems that kind of comes after you design the aircraft, and then 5 years later there's all these problems, and now there's what is the solution for that. I like to find the solutions for these kind of problems and be innovative about those solutions. I'd like to find ways to make practices of inspecting easier, better, so that maintenance or the operation of the aircraft goes well. And so these are the kind of things that, and you gotta kind of back that up with what you've been doing and find ways to connect it. I think that would be the good way to do it. I'll tell you, at the end of that, I did get the job in maintenance, which I was like, oh no. And in my mind, I told myself, yes, I'll start here, and in 10 years, and in 5 years' time, I'm going to be in the analysis group. But I think the being open-minded about what your first job is also an important thing, because I think that was probably the best thing that happened to me, that I started with maintenance, and I was dealing with damage and trying to deal with repair and being really hands-on, and I got so much of time with the technicians that I learned the most in that job, and that was a great way to start. Finally, I did get into analysis, where I was then stuck in a room full of computers, I guess, and I never really think that I actually preferred that in the end. So what you think you like sometimes may not be exactly what you will enjoy. So just also be open-minded about that.
I think what I'm taking away from each response is that whatever job you're applying to, it seems like you don't, it doesn't have to be something that you want to do for the rest of your life. You don't absolutely have to be die hard for that single position, but what can you get out of it? Why is it beneficial to you? You're not just, I want a job isn't good enough, as far as it seems like to me.
So I'll contradict that.
Okay, yes,
first off, I don't remember what I said, and I'm pretty sure I probably screwed it up on my first job, so I don't remember that. But I was just going to say, when people answer that, I hire aerodynamicists, and people that went and took some classes in school and thought, yeah, maybe I could do aerodynamics, maybe I could do mechanical engineering, and they sort of say that, what are you interested in? Oh, I could do lots of different things. I don't want them. I just don't want them. There are, the people I'm looking for are the ones that answer that question saying, when I was 3 years old, I didn't really walk around the house, I flew around like an airplane. And when I was in second grade, everybody had to do a report on a hero, and a lot of people chose like a football player, but I chose the Wright brothers. And then when I was in high school, I just sort of learned about the SR-71 because I was fascinated by it. And in college, I really liked fluid mechanics, and that's my person. That's the one I want. And I do feel when I hire somebody, it's not slavery, I don't hold them forever, but I do feel that this is a lifelong commitment, and there's a lot of people that wouldn't want that, but they're the ones that I want.
Cool, thank you for that.
Thank you so much for answering the question.
I want to move on to the next topic. This topic kind of just touches on what to expect from maybe your first opportunity, your first full-time position, and what are some of the things that you might have not taken into consideration that are actually playing a pretty significant role day by day. So I'm going to start with the first question. It says, what are some unexpected career obstacles that many engineers encounter after entering the industry and starting their professional careers, and how would you recommend to be proactive against these certain things and be ready for them versus reactive?
I could start. Well, I think the first thing that you think when you join a job is that, well, I've just gone through my engineering training, so now I know everything and I'm going to be able to get it all done, right? And then the first thing you're going to figure out is that, no, you don't. You kind of have to start from scratch, and then you say, well, what did all these professors do? And, they've done nothing really useful, right? Well, don't blame us. It's like that no matter where you go. What you learn in the course of getting your degree is about the fundamentals, the basics, and then everything is really different when in terms of application, because each system, each aircraft, whatever system you're dealing with, they all have their own detailed differences that you have to then sort of learn about. So you are going to have that period of time when you hardly know anything and you're just sitting there thinking, well, I thought I was just graduated, threw my hat around, and I feel so great, and now I feel really like I'm not great. But if you keep your mind open and you have this idea that I'm willing to learn, and whatever I've done in my training helps me because I've got the fundamentals to learn faster than anyone who didn't have that. So the stuff I've learned in class is all about giving me the base to be able to learn faster than everyone else, and than anyone else who didn't have it, and that I'm open to just admitting when I don't know what it is, and learning from the people around me in a very humble way. And if you're open like that, within 6 months, within a year, you start to get more and more proficient at the specific tasks of your job, or the specific areas of the aircraft that you're dealing with, because everything is really different for different systems, right? There are some common baselines, but don't expect to go in thinking that you know everything right away. So I think is the biggest obstacle that you tend to face, but keeping an open mind and being very open to learning is really the important thing.
I'll agree with that. And essentially, I think in school you learn, I guess maybe the one thing that, I remember when I was in school, a lot of people said, you need to take calculus and stuff to get through school, but real engineers don't use that. And I heard that a lot, and I'm here to tell you that they do. So maybe some disciplines don't use it so much, and maybe other areas don't, but I feel safe to say that I use virtually everything that I learned in undergrad and graduate school. Not the same stuff every day, but I use it over and over again. And then the part that I agree with too is, those give you the tools, but the real difficult part is sort of coming up with the questions and knowing what analysis to do. And then once you figure that part out, then you can pull on this set of tools to work on it. And so some of that's taught in school, but really it's a lot, it's on-the-job training to figure out what questions to ask and what analysis to go forward. And then the other thing that I'll say that is sort of a sad thing, at least at Lockheed, is we try pretty hard to hire like the top 10% of students, and so we hire people that are all really good. They're all at the top of their class, and then you get racked and stacked with all these other people out there. So somebody is the bottom, and they've never been used to being at the bottom. And then all of a sudden here they are because they're with a whole bunch of really, really good people. They're used to being with the schmuckos, but now they're just with the good people. And so it is sort of a tough thing when you first start to realize that you're maybe not the top of your class anymore because you've been selected to be with a higher class workers.
I'll say one thing about first getting out and going to school, and I liked your example about the maintenance. I thought that because your professors are about to tell you that they'll make you think you're going to be designing the next spacecraft or airplane coming out of college, and you're thinking, oh, I'm going to come out and I'm just going to get all these wonderful opportunities and all. But in reality, when you get out, you got this whole wide range of stuff you did in school, and you're going to get hired for a very small sliver, at first anyway, about what you do with your career. I mean, you may have to, just to get in, you may have to take that maintenance job. It's not glamorous, but you go in and you make the best of it and if you want to be an aircraft designer someday, or you want to be a spacecraft designer, you set your sights down the road and you work your curved road to get to there. You're kind of fortunate in getting to go out and top percent, but the other 90% are going to start out somewhere. They're going to have to work their way in, and so you might have a disappointment at first. It may not be the most exciting job. You stay there a couple years, and you look for opportunities, and you go for the long run. That's kind of what I do with my career. I started out as a technician in the shop, and as things opened up, I worked my way into the job I love today. And it's the perfect job for me. So just be patient and just understand that when you first get that first job, it may not be your hopes and dreams, but it's going to take you. It's part of paying your dues and working your way up.
So I work in research, so I'm used to setbacks, whether it's funding setbacks or your proposals not being selected, or these sort of things, thinking that you have the greatest idea ever and you don't, or somebody doesn't believe that you do. So I'm used to those sort of things. But in terms of unexpected things that have happened, I find more unexpected opportunities than really unexpected setbacks. For example, one of the proposals that I wrote didn't get selected, and so instead, as you heard, I got to represent NASA on an international forum in Cork, Ireland. So I got to live in Ireland for 9 months this summer. And that came from an unexpected setback. It freed up some of my schedule, and I got selected as the NASA representative on an international forum. So there's a lot of unexpected things that are going to happen. I think you have to figure out what to do when that happens. You have to figure out how to pivot. There will be pivot points in your career, or you've probably experienced some already going through your schooling. I think the big takeaway is don't get discouraged and find a way to make it work for you.
I'm going to take a little different approach. From my personal experience, one of the biggest surprises that I had, and I had experience with this before, going into the professional career, but one of the setbacks that I faced initially was office politics. I don't know. Maybe my experience has been unique, but engineers have egos sometimes. So I mean, it's coming to the situation. I learned really quick, to approach it as a supportive. I'm here for teamwork. We're here to work together. And letting the senior engineers turn away that project. And I'll take this project then. That's fine. I'll take this project and run with it. And you do an excellent job, and you get noticed, and you continue to excel, and eventually you become one of the senior engineers, and you're respected. And hopefully at that point in time, from your experiences, the ego is not as inflated, and you're much more respectful to the young engineers that are working underneath you. And then secondly, I'll caveat this that it may not always be the best advice, but learning to say no. Understanding your limits and your capabilities and what you're working on, and that you want to be open to new ideas, but you don't want to burden yourself to where you're failing on all of the different projects that you're working on. And just be honest. Say, hey, look, I've got a full load. These are all the things I'm working on. I don't know if I can take this on and be 100%. If you want me to take this on and do it, we can compromise somewhere else, or we can push schedules on one of these other projects, delay it, and then I can jump on this project. But just be open, because you don't want to set expectations with your supervisors that you don't want to be the yes, 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 and then you fail because you don't have the capacity to handle everything that's on the plate. So
the next question, it's a little less requiring of detail. I guess it's. So how would you, or what advice would you offer someone that has their first day of work, of their first job, their first full-time position next week, and it's the first of their professional career, and a little more than don't take Dr. Glenn Keppard's parking spot. What would you advise?
To do on your first day?
To be aware of, to set a good impression.
Well, since you said my name, I'm trying to think of an answer. I guess it would be sort of what's been said a few times, is just be open to the opportunities that are afforded to you. And so look and see, you know, what's being asked. And then I guess I'll alter things a little bit, you know, if I'll give a story on my life, but I generally don't think I led the best life, so people shouldn't follow it. But I remember my first job, I was working for the government, so I was thrown this book of specs in front of me, and somebody else was building this particular part of this weapon system, and I was supposed to read the specs and make sure that they did it. And I was reading through it, and I read what they did, and all I was supposed to do is read through it and say, how are you guys doing it? And I got about a 16th of the way through this, and I saw that there was this particular thing that I thought as under thermal expansion, it would crack under it, and so I went off and I worked like 3 days on this little analysis to do this. So of course, it's their job to do this, and I'm not supposed to, but I was so bored reading those specs that I just had to do something. And I remember I took it to my boss and I said, hey, this thing's gonna break because it's gonna crack like this. And he said, yeah, you're supposed to read the spec. And I said, yeah, I didn't make it through it. I got to this point there, and then I worked on this. And to his credit, he didn't fire me because I didn't do what my job was, but he also, I guess, sort of realized that I was going to go in a different direction. And, that was long. That wasn't the answer to that question. Somebody else has got to have a better answer.
I'll tell you one thing that you know, when you're here with your fellow engineering students, you're all kind of out of the same mold. You know, some of you are probably introverts and stuff like that, but when you first get into the real world, and you have all kinds of different personalities, and I tell my son this all the time, people skills cannot be stressed enough. I mean, doing those little things like, you know, you have all different ages of people, you know, you want to do the little things like make them feel that they're interesting, you know, you look in the eye and talk to them, all those little things, because when you get with this whole spectrum of people, and some people are emotional, I mean, so there's this whole thing, and you got to figure out how to fit in with all these people, and it can be a challenge. It's been a challenge my whole career, because I'm not that type of person. I'm more of a stick to what's got to be done, keep it technical, you know, don't bother with them. But when you have, you know, all kinds of different people that have different needs and stuff, some people from HR that's very emotional, you know, stuff like that. You gotta know how to fit in with those people. So start early, you know, and read some books. I was actually brought this because my dad, he was a salesman. He's all about people, and my son, who I won't call out here, but made him read Dale Carnegie's Win Friends and Influence People, and go read that book, and you know, pick up some tips about how to deal with people, because it will make a huge difference on your career. You know, you can be the smartest guy in the world, but if you can't get along with people, you know, or people don't like it, your career's going to suffer from it. So that would just be my little piece of advice.
I'd say don't underestimate the power of saying I don't know if you really don't know. Being a fresh out of college person starting your first day in your new job, you're not going to know everything, and you're not going to be expected to know everything. But you will be expected to show up on time and be ready to work, and be willing to ask questions if you have questions, and you will have questions. But you know, there are so Glenn has a thing he says, if I ever see you again, I'm going to ask you this question. And so, huh?
You got it wrong.
No, I got it.
You got it. Okay.
Oh no. So I mean, so there will be things that you will be expected to know, like the answer is 2 pi. If you ever ask you a question, you don't remember to say 2 pi.
Okay, you got it right.
But I was just saying, yeah, you won't be expected to know everything, and realize that going into your first position. But don't be afraid to ask questions, and don't be afraid to say I don't know.
And I'll just add a little bit that, you know, I think, you know, people skills are really important. So maybe on that first day, start scoping out who you can kind of get kind of close to a little bit to find out more, and of course don't stay with the wrong crowd, but make yourself spread out a little bit so that you kind of learn about different people in different areas, and so you kind of have friends in different areas, and you start to learn about the environment around you a little better.
I would, only one small thing, show up early and stay late. You know, employers like to see that you're dedicated and that you knew, because when you first start a position, you're not going to be very productive. And so you want to show your employer that you value that they're taking their time to teach you a position. You know, being there early means that you're ready, you're actually there on time, you're ready to go at 8 o'clock whenever your coworkers show up. And then staying late, that means you're overlapping anyone who's staying there, or if someone stays a little bit late. It gives you opportunities for intimacy with some of your coworkers, and you can get that one-on-one dialogue where you can get tips, you know, tricks, and you know, some secrets that may not be able to be exposed during normal working hours.
So the next question I want to ask, we're going to switch to the next topic, but this question is, it particularly deals with, you know, the different jobs that you might face throughout your entire career, and possibly some of the contracts that come along with it and how to negotiate them. This particular question asks, once you're in an established career and you feel like you know, you might feel stuck in a development path and it's not quite what you expected and it's not really what you want, but you feel like you've dedicated enough time to, it's a bit harder to get out of. How would you recommend switching that? And could you just cold turkey, if you will, start a new focus?
Yeah, I think I can answer that because I've done that a couple of times. So I think you know, having well, it's really much harder to get out of something and do something totally different, right? Getting into something is pretty easy, but you know, getting out of something, and because it becomes your comfort zone. So if you've been working in one area for 3 years and then you say, well, I don't think that I'm going anywhere with this in the near future, or I don't see myself doing this for the next 20 years, then it's time to move. Or if you feel like you're not challenged enough, I already know every single thing that's going to turn up on my table tomorrow, and I know how to solve it like in 5 minutes, and then I don't have anything to do. It also means that it's time to get something bigger to do, or you know, move on maybe. So if you're really not feeling like you're excited about what you do every day, then I think it's hard to say, well, I'm going to get out of my comfort zone and do something else, and you're not sure if it's going to be the biggest mistake of your life, I guess. But you'll never know unless you take that leap, right? So I think I've taken that leap maybe twice or 3 times, and I kind of used education as a way to kind of get there. So taking a break to do a higher degree sometimes helps, because you know, you're at this place where I've done this for so long. Now I'm like, I'm not sure if I want to do this for the next 20 years, and if that kind of worries you, then something like that, taking a break to do that, or finding something different entirely is necessary. But I think it's important to kind of be realistic. I mean, it might sound like, oh, I've spent the last 5 years just learning this thing, how can I just leave it? But if you look at your whole life, you know, that 5 years is just nothing really, right? So I know at some point I said, I've worked for 7-8 years now, I'm gonna stop and go do my PhD. It's gonna take 5 years of my life, I'm gonna not work for 5 years, all this money is not there anymore. Oh my God, 5 years of my life to do this. But now when I look back, those 5 years were like nothing, right? And it's like in the span of your life, this thing is just like a little thing. And that's in the long term when you look back, making that huge jump, it's not such a big deal at all, even though it's kind of like, well, I've spent 5 years learning this, well, it's just 5 years, you know. You're gonna learn a lot more. There's a lot more out there at the end.
I would say, you know, look for bridges to change careers. If you're in something you don't like and you want to transition, look for bridges. So look for maybe moving to a different department within the same company, so you're under the same umbrella. You know, those other managers in the other division have probably had interactions with senior management in your division, and you know, you can transfer that way. But as you know, as engineers, you know, you guys have a basic core set of problem solving, and that's applicable in any profession. So I mean, it's just a matter of looking at your current skill set and forming, you know, key traits and key skills that you currently have, and looking at what that position that you might want to be and how it applies. And then it's about marketing and selling yourself in that way. So telling that story of, you know, this is what I did. I understand, you know, I'm an engineer, but I want to be, you know, a pediatric dentist or something, you know, and just translate your skill set into the problems and the challenges associated with that position, and sell it. So.
I will add a few to these, because I've done this a lot in my career, probably 5 or 6 times at least. And I was kind of the same way. I got the point. I think the longest position I stayed with was about 12 years, and it was one as an engineer in one group. And I got to the point where it was the same thing. The stuff I was doing, I didn't even have to look at procedures and stuff. I just did them by heart. And I was really afraid to switch groups, because at the Space Center, it takes 5 years to get what they call stand-boarded, to where you can sit on launch consoles and stuff like that. And I switched, and man, it was the best thing I ever did. You know, I went to this new group, and I got refreshed, I got remotivated, you know, my career, and then 5 years later, I changed again, and I'm kind of on a cycle now where I don't stay in one job any longer than 5 years anymore. And you know, I've been able to do so much stuff in the space program, and seen so much stuff, and I got into project management out of engineering, and I've seen it really suited me, you know. And so yeah, don't be afraid to move. You know, if you see a job, a senior job or something like that you like it, you know, leapfrog it. You know, work a few years in this, and leapfrog into something else and put you in a better position to get to where you want to go. And you'll never be disappointed. You know, you might get stuck at one point where you hit a bad one, but overall, over the whole career, you'll be happy that you moved it. It also helps you with negotiating pay too. So that's another benefit.
That brings me to my next question. This next question is actually about negotiating employment contracts. So what would you say kind of serves as a catalyst to affect your salary by increasing it and your qualifications? What are some of the things that might bring you to those jumps sooner? I understand it's not all about the money, but it sure does play a factor. So, and we actually got this question a couple times.
I can start with that. In my experience, I had always wanted to, you know, start my own company, but before that, you know, I entered in to Metters as a production control coordinator. As a graduating aerospace engineer, I'm going to go, you know, look through Excel spreadsheets and make sure that parts got on order. But it was a great opportunity. I got to learn the ins and outs of the organization. Moved into engineering, and this whole while I had, you know, when I started the organization, I saw the program managers, and I saw what the challenges that they had to deal with. They got to deal with engineering, finance, the customers. They got to touch all the different parts of the organization, and knowing that one day I wanted to go off and start my own business, that would equip me and give me my skills that I would need to be an effective entrepreneur and start my own company. And so I had program management set in my sights. Moved into engineering, became project engineer, and really saw that if I didn't choose to go get a management degree, that, you know, most likely being transitioned into program manager wasn't going to happen in that organization, just because of the size and how big they were. So I made the decision to go off and get my MBA. The employer didn't fund it, wasn't backed, but I chose that path. And you know, a meeting occurred without my knowledge, basically amongst the general manager and the program managers, where they sat down and said, "Look, Aaron, he went off and he's getting ready to graduate with his MBA. If we don't start giving him programs, he's going to leave." And so, you know, ultimately what happened is I ended up getting small projects, small programs that I was responsible for, and it led into, you know, program management. I got to take on all the research and development projects within the organization, so all the new product development for the company. I got to spearhead that within that group because of my engineering background. And then, you know, leaving the company and going off and starting my own business, I have now had the skill set and the exposure to all the different areas that I needed to bring it all together and make that my goal happen. So mine was forced through education to kind of force the hand of the employer.
I'll say in engineering, the thing that essentially gets you promoted quicker is what the question was.
Right.
So it's similar to what I had said before, but if you're a person that you get your job and you're told to do something and you go off and you do it and you work it and you get it done pretty much on schedule, maybe even a little bit before, and then you say, okay, what's my next job? And you do the same on that over and over again, you will have a very good, mediocre career. You won't really distinguish yourself, but you'll get promotions more or less on schedule, and maybe on that. If you're the type of person though that goes to work on something and you either complete on time or maybe even a little long on schedule, but all of a sudden you say, well, now since I did this, I now see we really need to go and do this, and you go to your manager and you say, we did this, but we really need to do this, and you move on. And so you're the type of person that's not only working the problems but identifying the next direction. And then with that as well, you sort of continue to broaden your skill sets. So not only do you do aerodynamics, but you take on maybe propulsion and you do other things like that. Again, from my experience, those are the ones that tend to distinguish themselves and move ahead a little quicker. And then I guess I'll say something that I've worked on plenty of things in my life that I did know how to do. But the ones that I find the most interesting are the ones that when I started it, I didn't even know if it could be done, and let alone I could do it. I mean, I sort of had an idea of a direction I was going to go, but I had no idea if it was going to work out. And I'd say probably certainly the jobs that I've liked and worked on and the projects I've worked on fall into that category. So I think if you take on those sorts of risks and then sort of realize that you'll figure it out as things go on, you tend to have a little bit more promotability.
Yeah, I agree. I think being a self-starter, finding new tasks maybe when you don't have enough work, that sort of thing can be helpful. From a research perspective, there are certain definitive metrics like the amount that you publish and being recognized by outside organizations. Those sort of things can play a critical role in when you move to the next steps.
Yeah, and I'll just add to that in addition to all of that, make sure that the people who are supposed to know that you're doing all of this know it. So the people skills part comes into play too. If you're doing a lot of stuff and you're doing it well, and no one knows that this is happening, then you don't get recognized. Remember, if you're in a company, especially if it's a big company, there's a lot of people there. It's really hard to stand out for some kind of earlier promotion. And worse still, if you're doing a lot of work and someone else is getting the credit for it, which happens, then it doesn't help. That really doesn't help. Then you're going to maybe see someone else getting the promotion at your expense. So the people skills and the ability to sell yourself, which I think that's necessary no matter where you go, that's important as well.
On your early career, particularly probably a more practical part, if you're not stuck and if you don't care about being stuck in the same location, same company, if you're willing to move and change companies, I wouldn't do it like after 1 year and stuff, but you get a few years in one company. Right now we're losing people to Blue Origin. They're jumping for huge jumps in salary. So if you don't mind moving, for the early part of your career, you'll jump up probably quicker. But I mean, if that's in the cards.
I want to mention that I think it might be best if we hold off on the individual topic questions from the audience and save them till the end, just so that way we can make sure we cover some of the topics that we have on the list. So we're going to move on to the next topic. So the title of this topic is Finding a Work and Life Balance. I know I personally have very many questions about this particular topic. We'll save it for another time. What are some of the things that someone could do, or some of the things that you might have personally done to create a balance between your personal or family life and your work life. And what worked for you? What didn't?
I have an answer for this. I wrote it down and I did some calculations. So, first off, I guess I'll start by saying that 40 hours of work a week is a lot. That is a lot of work, and I think a lot of people that think they're working 40 hours a week are really spending a fair amount of time wandering around talking to people. The football game was last weekend, we should discuss that. And so if you really put in 40 hours of work, then that alone might be enough in a lot of companies to distinguish yourself. I heard an HR person once say that at Lockheed, that they think that the average, the HR in the world says that 28 hours of work is what they really think people are putting in general. And I remember looking at the guy next to me thinking, wow, holy crap, we really should ease up. Because I really feel that when I'm at work, you know, I'm doing stuff all the time and all that. So that's it. And then the other thing that I would say to work-life balance is I tell my kids this, there's sort of the 10% rule. So even when you're in school, if you're asked to write a term paper that's 10 pages, make one that's 11. You can do one that's 12, but that doesn't really matter that much. But you don't want to do one that's 9, you don't want to do the one that's 10. Usually if you do 10% more, that's pretty good. And then the last thing that I did the calculations on is there's 168 hours in a week, and if you sleep 8 hours a night, that's 56 hours. And if you prep for like sleep, you know, even 3 hours a day, brushing your teeth, showering, you know, washing your whatever, that's 21 hours a week. If you eat an hour and a half a day for meals, which seems like a lot, and actually I'd say that's maybe part of life rather than work, but nonetheless that's 10 and a half. If you commute 1.5 hours a day for 5 days a week, that's 7.5. And then if you did work the 44 hours following the 10% rule, that adds up to 139 hours, leaving 29 hours per week for life, or 4.14 hours per day. That's a lot. What else do you need to do? Isn't that enough? So I would say that is work-life balance. Is if you just do 40 to even 60 hours a day, you still get, or 60 hours a week, you still get like 3 hours of life per day. I don't know what people do in those 3 hours. Certainly, the worst thing you could do would be like watch TV or something like that. And I guess the other thing, you did ask what you do personally, is I've been known to put in a few extra hours a week. But I've always, and I have 4 kids and a wife, and I've always let them know that them and my companies know that weekends and holidays and vacation are my time. So I very rarely, but sometimes, but very rarely work on the weekends. But I might put in 60 hours a week during the week by coming in early and staying late. And but nonetheless, my family always knows like the weekends are time that I spend with them, and that seems to have worked out relatively well for everyone. My wife didn't divorce me.
Well, in your early years, forget life. You're working, just work. Before you get married, before you get kids, everything gets complicated. Just figure you're going to work. And I would go when I first started. I think I worked one span of 7 weeks where I didn't take a day off, So you do that in your early years, and you meet your significant other, then life starts happening. And kids will take a lot of time when you get young kids, but I would say that you should always do something where you have exercise, because exercise relieves stress and keeps your head clear. And then something there's art is something that's that you should consider important. Something where you go out and you do something creative. For me, it's music. I play music, and those two things I think help me tremendously. I don't know if it does anybody else, but I always, getting out and doing some type of outdoor activity that clears your head, keeps you healthy, makes you a better worker when you get to work. And keeps you happy.
I would say. So we have this thing at work where you can actually donate your leave. So if you don't use your leave, you can actually give it to somebody else. But why wouldn't you just take your annual leave? There are so many people that I work with that don't actually take vacations. They don't choose to take some time off to spend with their families and that sort of thing. And this is a part of our benefits to be able to take time off to make sure that you're doing that. And as you accrue more time with a company or with an agency or an organization, you usually get more time with your family. So take advantage of those times. I always use all of my time every year. And I set boundaries with my coworkers and with my supervisors. If I'm at work, I'm at work. But if I'm at home, don't text me because I'm at home. And I'll talk with you tomorrow. You can send me an email, but don't expect me to answer it until tomorrow. Setting up those sort of rules, but also with your family, unless it's an emergency, let me be at work while I'm at work. Setting up those sort of rules can really help with work-life balance.
Okay, so I can add a little bit to that. I think the point about when you just start to work and you don't have all those family commitments as much. That's about the time that you put in all that effort, and that's probably the time that you need to put in all that time and effort most. I started working. When I started working, it was kind of like the people around me were working. Basically didn't have life, so they were working a lot of hours a week, and I ended up doing that as well, just because of the pressure around me. It was that way. I also found that it depends on company culture. So if they respect your time, then you're probably going to have a better time as well. So in my company, for example, the first beginning, it was kind of like, oh, we decide to have meetings on Saturdays instead, so that we don't use our work week to do it, and that kind of really was hard. But it wasn't too hard until I think family came around. So when I had kids, I think I tried to continue that kind of working time, but it wasn't good. It wasn't good. I mean, you don't feel good. You're just not enough. So half the time you're working at 150%, and you're just exhausted mostly. So I think that also contributes to your decisions of what you want to do and how you want to live. So I'd say that definitely don't burn yourself out. But maybe in the beginning, when you have a lot of energy to do that, go ahead and burn yourself out, and you find that if you're really excited about what you do, right? So if you have a project and your project's kind of like the exciting thing, I'm sure that I've met some of my friends who were in SpaceX at the beginning times when there weren't many of their employees, and they were crazy about what they did. You wouldn't see them for weekends. They're working days and weekends, and it's kind of like they know they're part of something big, and if you've got that going on, then great. You don't even have to motivate yourself to do that. You could go ahead and do it. But if you're feeling the strain, then do yourself a favor and not try to overload yourself, and because it might just lead to you saying, I can't do this anymore, which you don't want to do after you've worked that hard. So keeping it up is tough, and then different different people have different situations. So I guess I'm always on speed dial for if anything goes wrong somehow. So I can't have a policy of don't call me at work. It's kind of like if something goes wrong, my phone's going to go. It doesn't go the other side because maybe you mess up. And I don't give so much trouble. My husband's probably going to be like, you're in trouble. So I'm the easy one to call, I guess, when things go wrong. Or when, homework's due tomorrow and I haven't done this, this, and this. I need help, right? So I'm the one who's going to be up helping. And I think it just depends on the situation you're in. And it doesn't change so much. So when you have little kids, it's hard. My kids are older right now. I have a 19-year-old and a 16-year-old, and I still have the same stuff. I still have some nights when I'm up until 2 just helping my son finish up his homework because he needs to do it and he needs help. So, and then all my plans just go out the window. I have a weekend where someone has something and needs advice on something, or and then I end up spending hours where I was supposed to get some other work done. So life just comes at you, and you just have to find a way to kind of balance it. And you'll find that your passion for whatever it is you're doing is going to drive that balance. Sometimes work-life balance isn't really a big deal if your work is really how you enjoy, really enjoyable. If you really want to put that time in, it's fine.
Moral of the story: don't be a mom, right?
I don't know. I'm sure it's different in other places. I think I'm just too easy. That's what it is.
I don't have anything to add, but I think I can paraphrase what it sounds like everyone's saying. Life has, you're going to be constantly juggling priorities as you move through life. You know, sometimes it's going to be work. You're at work 80, 100 hours a week. You know, sometimes you have sick kids. You have, you know, emergency situations in your family that you've got to be there. You know, one thing that I always strive to do is be 100% of where I'm at that point in time. So if I'm at work, I'm there 100%. If I'm at home, I'm there 100%. You know, don't have your phone out while you're trying to play with your kids, or, you know, talking with your wife or your spouse or your significant other. Be there, and you'll find that, you know, the quality of the time goes up, and it's not necessarily about how much time you're spending, but the fact that you're all in, you're 100% there at that time.
So I guess it just really comes down to good budgeting, as you say, with every government's calculations, which I'm going to ask you for at the end. So, this is personally an ongoing battle for me every day. So that answers my next question as to, you know, how to maintain that balance when your situation is not entirely static. No situation is really entirely static, and jobs are always going to be changing, as you see in this world, so things come up, so you got to adjust accordingly. We're going to go to our last topic here. This one's a little bit more on the interest side, less on the student question side. It regards future technologies and trends of the aerospace and software industry. Where do you see the aerospace industry 20 years from now?
Hopefully on Mars. Yeah, I kind of thought, I talked to some people about this today, and just a couple of the basic things that come out. Composites, I think composites are going to be big. And I think that's a good field to go into. I think we're going to see a lot more automation. You know, everything. There's a lot of software involved, a lot more than there used to be. You know, so I think you're going to have some component of software, you know, in your background with software. So that was a couple of things that I can kind of think of.
Yeah, I think if from a historic perspective, there are whole eras of time that have been defined by materials. Right? And so materials is always an interesting topic to study if you're looking for something. Investigate different, maybe new novel materials as a field of study. For me personally, my work is in figuring out how to get astronauts to survive on different planetary bodies. Right now, it's the moon and Mars. Developing those technologies that enable humans to live off of the Earth. So these are sort of long-term goals. So we're talking about 20 years from now. And if we look at the plans of not only NASA, but other government agencies from around the world, or space mining companies, this sort of thing that are up and coming, fields in situ resource utilization is very important for me. And I think it will be very important in the future of space exploration. That means using the resources that we have on wherever we're going to convert these raw materials into things that we need to survive. It could be for building structures, it could be converting the CO2 atmosphere of Mars into oxygen and propellants for the trip home. All these things fall under the larger umbrella of in situ resource utilization. And for NASA, that is a big topic moving forward. How do we develop technologies, or what technologies do we need to allow humans to survive on long duration missions?
So I'll add that yes, I think materials are really good because I do a lot of research on materials and structures. So I'd say it's really promising, not just materials but manufacturing, and how you thought that, you know, manufacturing is just manufacturing, it's all over, and suddenly it's just gone crazy, right? There's all this new 3D printing, metal additive manufacturing, and those things kind of can be real disruptors. They can change complete ideas that we thought we couldn't achieve some progress, and you could just skyrocket some idea, you know, just because of these new manufacturing techniques. So I think there's definitely a lot of promise in the next, you know, 10, 20 years to see a lot of different changes just because of the manufacturing and materials advances that we have. If you think about how manufacturing is going to change things. It's going to change things in multiple ways. First of all, we could probably design things that we never thought could be designed. You know, if you're talking about micro machining, you know, certain designs that you never even possibly could make before, it may be possible right now. That you're just additively manufacturing these really intense designs. And you also have to think out of the box, because you're usually stuck with a set of processes because you have some limitations, and now there's a whole bunch of limitations that's just taken out. So there's probably going to be a lot of new innovative ideas that come out of these you know, advances that we have to watch out for, and it's pretty exciting time for these kind of areas.
I think those were all good comments, and I guess maybe I'll try to take it to even a higher level. In engineering, you know, we basically come down to analysis and experimental. And I think as time goes by over the next 20 years, and really up until times of Star Trek, I think the experimental will continue to diminish, and analysis will become more and more important. And simply because it's just a cost thing. Analysis is a lot cheaper to do than, you know, testing. I can say from a wind tunnel point of view, you know, we've been saying for the last 30 years, wind tunnels will go away, and they haven't. They're still around, but there's fewer. The more get closed every year, and they're going down. And so I always say 5 years from now, I doubt I'll be doing wind tunnel tests, but I've been saying that for like 25 years. So I guess I'm wrong on that, but I do fewer. I do way fewer. And just because computers are more powerful, we have better analytic tools and all that, I believe that in general, engineers can be called upon way more to do analysis type stuff. And then we'll never get away from experimenting. I'm all over that idea. And certainly in basic research, it'll still have a very strong point. But I think as far as maybe corporate America, experimental stuff will take more and more of a backseat to analysis.
Can I add one thing under that? I know with the new program that we're working on now, we are doing so much more modeling than actual stuff that it has amazed me really, because especially like, you know, we have a design visualization group that you know, you can put the whole rocket and everything, you can build it up, you can actually walk around virtually and see stuff before it's built based on the design, and it's a huge game changer. And you know, I think that's we're going to get more into that because it's so cheap. You can do it on a computer versus actually going out and building stuff. And then the other one you talked about was the 3D printers. I saw a presentation on, it might have been from SwampWorks, I don't know, but somebody presented something, and you know, the idea on the 3D printers is someday they're going to build them so they can put them in space, and they can just build structures in space. You don't have to launch them; you just have to launch the materials. So that is that's a game changer. That's big stuff.
So if you've been on the SwampWorks tour, then you've probably seen that technology. We're working on it.
I would say, you know, no matter what, there's at least one guarantee, and that's 20 years from now, the technological landscape is going to look completely different than it is today. As engineers and as you advance through your careers, you know, one thing that you always want to be mindful of, and I think you should have as probably one of your paramount goals, is to be continually learning. You know, keep your head out there. Look at, you know, spend time every day reading technical papers, looking out in the market space, saying, okay, what's going on? You know, what's happening? What are these trends leading towards? Because you want to make sure that you don't become obsolete. You know, you don't want to get stuck in wind tunnel testing only. And now, you know, wind tunnels are closing down and they're using CFD, or you know, you're machining and welding, and you know, forget about studying you know, material properties for additive manufacturing type applications. So you want to make sure you're continually growing as an engineer with the anticipation that by the time you wrap up your career, it'll look nothing like what it is today. So
I want to avoid asking a redundant question, but kind of focusing more on the present tense. Do you see anywhere in particular in the industry that is at a very large demand for employees now? Kind of like how we're jumping to 20 years from now, how 20 years ago they'd be jumping to now. Where is that demand? Where would someone go looking for it?
I can say in aerodynamics, aerospace, there's a big DARPA project for hypersonics. So that seems to cycle about every 7 to 12 years, but this does seem to be the biggest push that I've seen. So there's multiple Department of Defense and DARPA-specific projects to increase America's ability to do hypersonics. So that's the big buzzword in 2017.
Okay, I'm going to open the floor for questions. We're going to start with that topic, so future technologies and trends and stuff. Does anyone have any questions regarding that topic?
Well, recently I was reading about how, well, Elon Musk was thinking about using internal rocketry as a new form of travel. How would you compare that to a hypersonic aircraft, and would it make the hypersonic aircraft obsolete at that point?
Wants to travel by rocket.
Yeah. Interesting.
Versus air breathing, where you have biprops versus air breathing, and that's the big difference, right? So and I think the big limiter with air breathing is supersonic into the inlet, right? So I think it comes down to money, right? So which is cheaper, you know? So. And I think that, you know, one of the things that I can't remember which one it is, but they use the hybrid engine. You know, they use basically tires and use nitrous oxide as an oxidizer with it. So it seems very cheap, very stable. You know, you might see a type of fuel like that. You know, a type of engine that comes out like that that's real stable and cheap. You know, so probably some hybrid of that type of technology maybe.
I guess I'll say too, with the DARPA projects, hypersonics not necessarily are breathing. I mean, it certainly would be like intercontinental ballistic missiles, or you know, those sorts of things would still be classified as hypersonic.
Okay. Thank you.
I want to open the floor for just general questions, anything that you might have ever asked yourself from a student position, and might have not really known where to go get that answer. Now might be the best time, so if you think of anything, feel free to ask. Let's start with Christian in the back.
So what I seem to think is that when a lot of students try to get their first job, a lot of people like to jump at whatever is offered to them. How do you determine your self-worth in the negotiation effort, and how do you also convene yourself in the negotiation efforts so that it's not too awkward, like when you're asking for more money or sort of benefit?
I can speak from a federal government perspective. There's not much negotiation. We students start at a certain salary and progress accordingly through steps. It's all very structured. It's all public information. You can look up those steps for those locations. The pay increases for different, going up in grade. So at NASA we use the general schedule, so you can take a look at that, and based on where you work, it depends how much you get paid. It's very structured from a federal perspective. Everyone else here, I think, will have a different answer than I will.
I would say know your market. Look at, there's tons of resources online that you can go. Look at the size of the company, the specific, if you can find out the specific roles in the position that you would be performing. A lot of that leads to what the base salary is going to pay, what the median salary, what that range is going to be. And then, typically the employers have a ballpark, and they're gonna offer you what they believe is fair. They'll start on the low end first, just from a financial perspective. But typically, you don't want to shoot. If they offer you a job at $45,000 a year, and you say, well, I really need to be making $65,000 a year, you're probably not going to make that jump between those two. So you want to kind of understand where they're coming in with the offer, the market space, the size of the company, and the job role that you'll be doing.
There's a great website. There's a lot of good ones, like you said, that you can see what the median range is, and especially for engineers, it's there's enough data out there to really show it. But But what I always hated on those applications was where they asked you how much money you want. And you feel like you're getting set up for failure, because you don't want to put too low, but then you don't want to put too high, and then so the best way to do is go to these tools that you were talking about, and it'll tell you the medium range. And what I would do is I would shoot for the medium, maybe a little bit above it, and go in, and then you got a little bit of negotiating room. But coming straight out of school, you're not going to get, they're not going to get too much negotiating. I mean, you got to kind of get your foot in the door. So, but use those tools online; those are really good.
I guess I'll also say that one of the best things that you can have to leverage or strengthen your position is multiple offers. So it might be one job that you really want, and maybe it's not offering a lot, and then maybe another job that you don't really want, but they're offering more. So you could, say, in order to make this competitive, I do have other offers that are more, and so wouldn't advocate making stuff up. But so it'd be best to have those offers. But I guess you could, be. And even when you get those other offers, you'd have to take into account cost of living and things like that. And actually, when I got out of school centuries ago, I got one offer at a place, and then a couple of people in California were looking at me, and they had actually said a few numbers, but they were relatively low. But if I took into account the cost of living and everything, they actually were. I guess it was the other way. It was they were really high, but I had this other place to take into account cost of living. Anyway, my point is I was offered a job for $45,000. I had a friend that worked at Boeing. No, $39,000. I had a friend that worked at Boeing, and he just said, refuse that and tell me you want more. And so I said, but I really want this job. And he said, no, refuse it. Tell me you want more. And so I called him up and said, oh, I want more. I want $45,000. And I thought they would come back after offering $39,000. In those days, 45 was a fair amount of money. I thought they'd come back and say, oh, well, we'll give you $40,000. No, they said $45,000. Boom. So that one phone call, I got an extra $6,000. What percentage is that? No one could calculate that. But I got a lot of it. And so I told my friend, man, he's responsible for, I took him out to dinner.
I think the big thing is to know your market. Definitely don't ask for more than what the market is offering. And there are lots of websites that can help you with determining in different fields and different companies what you should expect to get.
You just brought up a good point though about other factors too. Medical is a big one. My last job, I changed jobs just for the medical. I think it saved me like $400 a month, something like that. So take a look at those benefits and
share options sometimes make a big difference. So.
Yeah, the 401ks and stuff like that. I mean, once you look at all of it, one that has a little lower salary might actually do a better job.
So to go off of that, if you compare base pay based on location between the government and industry, you should definitely also take into consideration the benefits. There are very good government benefits. Working for the federal government it does provide a lot of good benefits. So when you're reviewing your offers, make sure you also take that into consideration.
Next question. Yes. Yep, you.
A lot of us are freshmen here, so we don't actually have the classes calc and physics. What advice would you give us necessarily for your term sheet for that?
Advice for what?
Trying to get ourselves out there so that way we can get a position when we reach higher levels.
I'd say try to add some internships over the course of you're a freshman now, you get a chance to plan your summers and your next couple of semesters, and make sure that you try to make the opportunities count. So you have the chance to kind of build up that resume right now. You're not thinking about this 2 months before you graduate, right? So that's a really good opportunity to start thinking about what looks like a good resume. And you might ask some of your seniors to show you what their good resumes look like and see how you can, make yours strong as well. But at the same time, I'd say don't do that at the expense of your classes. Usually your freshman year or the beginning years of your engineering degree might be a little tough to deal with. So don't load yourself too much that you find yourself struggling. Once you know that you've got a hold on time management and getting your classes done, then it's time to start looking for all these other things on the side, the extra research position, all that sort of stuff.
Yeah, I think one thing that you have on your side right now is time. You have the ability right now to go around to different professors, and even if you're not at that level where they're willing to take you on as a student, people like to talk about their work. People like to tell you about the things that they're doing. So even if you can't get some of your professors' time because there's, for whatever reason, just get out there and network. Start talking with people about the things that you're doing. Find what you're interested in. You can start doing that now, even if you don't necessarily have the skill set that somebody's looking at to hire you yet. You have time on your side. So most of the students that I end up talking with at these types of events are people that are graduating in a couple of weeks or a few months from now. And at this point, they don't really have any internships, or they're looking at getting their first internship or something. You're in a position now where you can start to plan for what you want to do. You start building that network. And that sort of thing doesn't necessarily take a lot of your time, just to make yourself familiar with what people are doing, like attending meetings like this, joining some clubs and occasionally attending meetings, and just figuring out what it is that you're interested in. It will be easier for you down the line when you're ready to start applying for those things.
I would say, wherever you are in your college career, look at what you're doing now and what you want to be doing, and look at what you're doing now and how you can combine that. So let me give an example. When I was undergrad, did my aerospace degree, I knew, I really liked flight mechanics. I like numerical methods, so I was kind of looking for something. All right, so I wanted a project that I could do, that I could bring all these pieces together and start doing stuff. And it actually led me into the modeling simulation world. So I was with SED's group here, and I was interested in figuring out, we were launching model rockets, and so based on wind conditions at the launch site, the shape of the cone, how can I figure out how big of a space we need to be able to launch these rockets? This was when Waterford Lakes, we actually used across the street from where the older Waterford Lakes was, we used to go there and launch rockets because of the wide open field, nothing there. So I was able to pull in, the programming that I learned as part of the, I think, feedback control at the time, pulling in numerical methods, doing Newton-Raphson iterative method for calculating the acceleration, the velocity, and the position of the rocket, and then writing it all into a program that predicted the flight of the rocket. And it gave me a project, something that I was able to take to employers and say, hey, look, this is something that I went off and did on my own, kind of because I was interested in it, and I was able to pull all these little pieces together. So, if you're in economics, you could do, feasibility studies on, how much things cost whenever you're designing them, and maybe pulling in some of those different elements together and creating these projects of interest.
If I could join the panel for just a minute, I want to recommend, because coming from a senior like myself, there are many things that I wish I would have done differently, and things that I'm also really happy that I've done. But as Dr. Agrawal said, getting a grasp on the time management is definitely very important to have first. But don't wait, because it's up to you. Take the initiative, and ultimately, the more you put in, the more you'll get out. Once your time starts to run out, you're really limited as to how much you can put in, so you won't be able to get as much out. So, any more questions? Yes.
How would you compare working for a government company versus like a private company, like SpaceX versus NASA, besides the benefits that you already
Like, I can tell you this much. You're going to work a lot more hours at SpaceX.
Yeah.
But when you work on a government program, and I think you'll agree that it's so much slower, because you have to go through so much bureaucracy. There's a lot more paperwork. There's definitely some advantages to it, but in a private company, you'll bypass a lot of that stuff. But they're also a little more brutal on you. You know, like I said, you're going to be working some hours. You might get paid good, but you might not get a lot of your personal time off. You know, but I'd say that's the biggest difference. My first job, I think, out of school really was working for Piper Aircraft, and you know, I went out there. We had an airplane, the three of us guys, and we did everything in that airplane. And the first day I walked into the Space Center, you know, walked into the shop back there, and I'm thinking to myself, oh, there's only going to be like 5 guys working on this shuttle, and I'm a little intimidated because I'm thinking, wow, 5 guys working on this shuttle is going to be tough. Oh no, there was a whole hangar full of 300 people, you know. And the first job they gave me had like 3 people that had to watch me just torque a couple things. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. You know, and that's one reason why I got out of that field. But yeah, it's just the regulations and bureaucracy in any government program is so much more than private.
So I worked for the government for about 10 years, actually for Jacobs Engineering. That's the same as you, right? But it was for the Department of Defense. And then I actually was a professor for 4 years. And now I work for industry. And I certainly can't speak for everybody, but I do like the industry experience the best. There is a lot of drama involved. There is a lot of close calls, and there's, at least for me, I have considerable more responsibility than I did when I worked for the government. The work's always kind of about the same. I go in on a good morning and write a few equations. The afternoon program them into a computer, you know, maybe do a wind tunnel test occasionally. But I would say, you know, as far as like being held accountable and all that, I get that more in industry, and I think that leads to making me happy.
I want to add a different element to your question if I can. You know, another thing to think about would be the size of the organization versus small versus large. One of the things that I've enjoyed is, you know, I did a short little stint at UPS in their industrial engineering group. And right then and there, I knew big companies are not for me. I don't want to be a cog in a wheel inside of an organization. And so that's what led me to smaller companies and, you know, obviously, you know, starting my own business. You know, I like being able to bounce around, a little ADHD, to be able to touch a whole bunch of different stuff within a project. And I get more fulfillment of seeing something that I designed and created, and now I can hold it in my hand and I get to deliver it to the customer. And so, you know, that's the element that I enjoy. And, you know, I would imagine that you can get that across both industry and defense if you're in a small research lab where, you know, you're a team of 6 people and you're developing products.
So fortunately, but unfortunately for your question, I haven't had the typical federal employee experience. These guys are laughing, I understand. A lot of civil servants, federal employees, they serve the role as I'm fortunate enough that I get to do hands-on development myself. A lot of the times, the federal employee provides the source of funding or the oversight on the project as opposed to directly doing the work. That's not always true. There are certain cases where that's not true. But I feel very fortunate to be a civil servant and also have the ability to touch hardware and, you know, do things myself. But unfortunately, a lot of no, I shouldn't say unfortunately. It's a different structure when you are it's a different role when you are a representative of the federal government as opposed to being a contractor providing a service to the federal government. And we can talk more a bit about that offline if you'd like, but yeah, let's leave it at that.
Yeah, and I think I've worked as a contractor for the federal government, so in that sense, I've kind of felt like the idea when you're in the industry is profit making, so a lot of decisions or you know, that's what leads to long hours in the end, because you're trying to make your timelines, make your profits, and you know, either make a name for yourself so you get more projects, right? So it becomes driven a lot by profits, which you don't, maybe, I'm not sure, but I don't think you feel it that much when you're in the federal government. I think that's kind of a big difference there.
Any more questions? Yes.
I have a quick question about graduate school. What advice would you give to somebody, I'm a junior, so I'm a little bit closer to graduating. I was considered graduate school, but I've heard different things about whether it's a good idea, bad idea, to do it right after your bachelor's versus going into your career and maybe working for a couple of years before pursuing that. And what, in your experience, would you advise?
So, like PhD or master's degree?
Originally, I always wanted to do a PhD from the beginning, but I've kind of heard different things. I've heard you don't want a PhD in engineering, or you at least want to get work experience because you don't want to make yourself overqualified for many jobs, or don't do it unless you definitely want to end up teaching, which is something that I don't think I want to do necessarily, but I do go into research. So I'm just kind of in between.
I think in corporate America, they sought after degrees, master's degree. So that PhD, I have a PhD, but I'm not sure Lockheed would have hired me right out of school. It's sort of the circuitous route that I took to get there. I have an awful lot of people that work for me. I hire them as bachelor's degrees and they go and get their master's degrees, and the advantage of that is the company pays for all or part of it, and they work 40 hours a week and then they do the school, usually about 2 classes. I think almost every one of them, it takes about 3 years, and almost every one of them says that that's the worst 3 years of their life. And you'd kind of want it to be, right? Because you could go and get a degree from the University of Phoenix or something, and it would be super easy and you could have the degree, but you would want your graduate's work, the amount of knowledge that you learn, to be relatively inconsistent with a 40-hour work week. So with that said, it's a well-worn path. People do it all the time. People get through it, and they are miserable for those 3 years, but they can do it. I didn't do it that way because I'm too lazy, I guess. So I started in kindergarten and ended with a PhD. And I didn't work in between except bagging insulation. That's another story. So my recommendation, and I tell this to my children, is, I would recommend that you just go and get your degree and then you go to work. Now, that said, I got a daughter that's working 40 hours a week and she's getting her master's degree, so you're probably not going to listen to me either.
So my path was, I started school as an undergraduate student. A couple of years into undergrad, I was offered a student position at NASA, and then I found out as I was getting ready to start my master's degree in engineering that they wanted to hire me. So moving from a student position to a full-time position, and I didn't want to turn down the opportunity. So I took the position at NASA, knowing that I eventually wanted to go on to graduate school. So I applied for a number of years. I did one of the programs like Glenn was talking about. I did what's called at NASA the Kennedy Graduate Fellowship Program. And they paid for me to come back to school to get a master's degree, which I recently finished a couple of months ago. But yeah, it was very tough to be both in school and at work. Part of the time I was away and I didn't have to work. But to answer your question in terms of is graduate school a good idea or should you get some experience first? I think you should definitely plan on I think you should plan on at some point getting a master's degree. There are lots of things in engineering, especially undergraduate, that you, in your equations and things, they just kind of set them equal to 0 or act like they don't exist. And then in graduate school, you take the same classes again, and now they're not 0 anymore. That was my experience. It's all the same equations. It's just Now,
Some things aren't zero.
now some things aren't zero. Yeah, I definitely see the benefit in, at a minimum, a master's degree. To be a senior researcher at NASA, to be considered more of a technical lead, those are positions typically filled by PhDs. That's just the way we do things at Kennedy Space Center. It's not always the case, but that's usually the role of a PhD, is the senior principal investigator position. Not everybody, but pretty much everybody. So it just depends. Graduate school, I think, is definitely beneficial, especially a master's degree. So either path, I think, is okay, but like Glenn said, you will be spending. I slept from 2 to 7 pretty much for 2 years. So get used to that if you take the other path. And maybe even if you don't, even if you just go directly to graduate school.
You know, I'm probably the only guy up here that didn't have a master's, so I can tell you from my side of it, definitely do it. If you got the money to do it, you know, then great. If you don't have the money, then go to work and get it done. But definitely do it. Shouldn't be a question if you have the means to do it.
I would say get out and work. Go work. Because once unless you want to stay in the academic realm, if that's the world you want to stay in, then by all means, I think you should go, full force all the way to PhD. But going out and actually working in industry, you learn things about yourself. You learn what you like, what you don't like, and it gives you goals and objectives that you may not necessarily have had just as a student. When I made the decision to go back into I always knew that I wanted to get a master's degree. I didn't know what, but when I got out, I learned more about management and program management and business. I said, hey, that would, as an engineer, having this business marketing, the soft set of technical skills, coupled with the technical skills of engineering, I just saw how much value that would bring. Even if I decided to stay in the engineering strictly path, it still gives me a way to communicate what I'm trying to do to, management, finance, the other people that you have to interact with at least some point in your career. You learn more about what you want to do. So I say, get out and work. If you look at a master's degree as a piece of paper, okay, but you're going to get value as looking at it as what skills can I go and learn that makes me more equipped to perform the job that I ultimately want to be doing. So it may not necessarily be a master's degree that you need to go after. It could be taking a couple of classes. It could be studying online, privately, stuff like that. It's learning those new skills. And something that I continuously strive to do is continuously learning and always learn. That's my
I'll say that it really just depends on your situation. So I would say open all the doors, first of all, as a student. In other words, set yourself up so that you can make a decision to do grad school if you didn't get the right job offer. But set yourself up to make that decision not to do the grad school if you got the best job offer that you want to take. And you if you open all the doors, then you pretty much get to the point where you can make that decision and you have multiple options. And you'll know at that point which one you want to take. So I'd say set yourself up so that you can potentially do both. And then the master's degree, I think, is, as everyone said, is something that you should probably strive for. I think in my case, I had always thought about doing a PhD as an undergraduate, maybe not necessarily to be an academic, but for me it was more about, well, I think that's like the pinnacle of so it's a challenge. I want to see if I can get to the top of that. What does it take to master my topic or master my area? So can I do it? That was what kind of drove me. But eventually, as I couldn't necessarily do it right after I graduated from my undergraduate, so I had a pretty non-traditional route. I had to go to work to pay off my loans, and life happens that way. And then I had a chance to go do my master's, and I did that. So I kind of worked, took a break, did my master's. I didn't find myself capable of being able to do both at the same time. So I needed to focus only on my education, or and that was what I did. So taking that break to do my master's, and then coming back to work again with the same company, just taking a no pay option, and then working again, and then deciding to go off to do my PhD, like after 6 or 7 years, and that's because life came first. So, and I wanted life first. So that made it all the more harder. So not only did I have to take off and go do my PhD, I also had to take my 2 kids with me to do that PhD. But I think it's very different. Everybody has a very different experience. I think it was a lot harder not to do it continuously, to have those breaks and then keep going back. There's a lot of inertia to say, well, maybe I don't really want this PhD. Maybe I could do without it, But it was in my list. Like I had like a 5 and a 10-year plan or something like that, which I needed to do. After the first week of working, I saw people around me who were there for like 20 years, and I suddenly felt like maybe I was going to be that one person. And writing those things down kind of made me remember why I wanted to do what I wanted. So if it was a goal that I really wanted to achieve, then that inertia sort of goes away. So I found that there are benefits to both. If you continued on to do your PhD, maybe you would be able to do it a little faster. You might have started your research a little earlier. Breaking it up like that ended up taking substantial amounts of time. Also, I found that if you broke it up, however, the positive was that as a PhD student who's mature, who's been in the industry, I was more focused about getting that PhD done and getting my work done. And every class that I attended was not about, well, I have to be in this class. It was, I'm not at work because I'm here. And so I'm really much more interested. I asked all the right questions. I never thought the same way I did when I was a different student each time. And so that was a very positive thing. So I think there's positives and negatives both ways. And I definitely think that, getting a PhD may not be, a lot of people think that, if you have a PhD, you're an academic. But really, if you look around and you think about people who make decisions in, research and innovation, and as I worked in industry, I felt like research was the direction I wanted to be. And I wanted to be what's next rather than what's now. And if you want to make the decisions on research and innovation, then it tends to be that you should go for that, degree. And it's not you're an academic, but you might be a researcher in a government lab or in a research engine of the company, that you work for. That's not maintaining or operating what's going on, but kind of thinking about what happens in the next 10 years.
Thank you.
So I want to stop the questions there. We're well over time, but I know we're enjoying the conversation nonetheless. Before I give any closing remarks, is there anything that you would like to comment on or just leave off? It's totally optional.
Well, I would say that you guys are very lucky. You're hitting. I think that you said it, you're hitting the right time to be getting out of school or being in this field. Everything on the East Coast is just exploding with jobs. So congratulations. Thanks for I got out of school. So enjoy it. You got a great career to look forward to.
Yeah, and I would just say that, the fact that you guys are out here right now, asking these questions shows that you have like a lot of ambition towards getting your first job. So I think that itself speaks very positively. So I think that's a great start.
I would say, as parting comments, Dr. Robert, she had alluded to this when she was telling about her experience in going to postgraduate school. But have goals. Always be aiming for something better, higher, different from where you are, and it'll continue to grow, and you'll continue to strive to be successful. Always have that 5-year objective, that 10-year goal. Keep always looking out where you want to be.
So from a maybe a slightly less engineering perspective, but just a more, something that isn't necessarily covered as much in your coursework as it should be, is understand the power of effective communication. So that is a big takeaway that I want you to take from me. I used to be a terrible public speaker. I graduated from college and would shake any time I tried to talk to people. You know, I was just very nervous, very shy person, and I pushed myself. I joined NASA Speakers Bureau and started off with people that I felt like almost certainly I knew more than. So I started with elementary school students, and I just would go out and talk with people, just getting used to talking to people. I think communication is something that is unfortunately underrepresented in your curriculum, and it's something that you definitely need to make sure that you focus on moving forward.
What they said.
With that being said, you know, as you can see, you know, bringing members from all different kinds of disciplines, all different kinds of backgrounds, and just all of their history, you know, they all really agree on a lot of things, but they have different ways of looking at it. So that's really the main purpose of this event tonight, to provide you with that opportunity where you otherwise might not be able to when you're networking with maybe one-on-one professionals. I want to say thank you one more time to the Central Florida section for holding this event. It's definitely very beneficial. I want to say thank you to the panel again. I know this is not easy taking this much time on your schedules. I think I speak for all of us when we say we really appreciate it. I want to mention a couple things to remember. Remember about SciTech. Remember about taking initiative on looking for those events, whether they be big or small, whether they're workshops or just little things that constantly add to your growth, to your eventual growth. And take the time to do it well, and it really will pay off. I want to say that I'm extremely humbled for this opportunity to be moderator. I learned a lot more than I anticipated, and about you guys in particular too. So with that being said, I hope everyone has a good night. I hope everyone learned a thing or two, and see you next semester.
Good meeting you.
Yes, I'm sorry. No, that's all right. Good job.
Thank
Where do you
you.
guys see? Where do you guys go?
Let's take a quick
Good meeting you.
Yeah, sure.
So the meeting's over.
Yes.
So
No, that's good.